notes here. We'll have mostly the conversation we just had. Maybe we'll talk about the girls a little bit. I don't know. We'll see.
You tell me. I'll try to.
It likes, it likes proximity, but they're very successful microphones, so not a problem. Hey, welcome to Wine Talk with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with David Stefan.
Stefan, indeed.
Stefan, indeed. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talk's, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasting, and sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa series and Sweet series of wines. Hey, have a listen to the Barrett sisters, the famed winemaker and winery owner Jim Barrett, his granddaughters. We're in the studio. We had a great conversation. That's on Wine Talks, as well as the legendary father and mother, Heidi and Bo Barrett. So listen for that. But today we are going back to Burgundy, France, one of my favorite places to study and learn about wine because it never ends. So welcome to the show, David. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here too.
This guy, just for the listeners, you may have a French accent, but living in New York. How many years you live in New York?
19 years in total.
Yeah, so he's got that New York French accent, which we'll try to decipher as we go along here. But welcome to the show. You're with Maison Louis Jadot.
Indeed, one of the Burgundy house with the richest history. But yeah, Louis Jadot in Beaune.
Back to
1859, creation of the winery, but first acquisition of a vineyard in 1826, Beaune Clos des Ursules. So the winery actually started way after the first purchase of vine by Mr. Jadot.
So that was an interesting conversation. And I want to lay it out because I told you earlier we had a representative from Albert Bichot and we talked about the layout of Burgundy. So let's kind of start with that and we'll walk into the history of Louis Jadot because perhaps one of my favorite négociants and propriétaires Burgundy is Louis Jadot, but it wasn't always like that. And if you start from the north, let's just start from the north to get the lay of the land for the listeners. We have Chablis.
Chablis, yeah. Some of the oldest soils in Burgundy are in Chablis, which is the land of Chardonnay with great salinity.
Are you making Chablis up there?
We are.
You are.
We are. In fact,
you didn't bring it today.
No, but it's very interesting you said that because we inaugurated a small cuverie, which we acquired, and we just inaugurated last December. So we now have a place to make wine in Chablis as well.
Wow!
And maybe we'll own vineyards at some point. Who knows?
Looking forward to that. So we start with Chablis, and then we're going to go to the east a little bit, right? And we're going to start the Côte de Nuit.
Yep, exactly. South of Chablis, Côte de Nuit.
And that's the furthest north part of Burgundy, other than Chablis, that we might make red wines, the Pinot Noir. And most of the Grand Cru is there.
Yeah, this is the land of the top reds, the wines with great ageability, the red wines with a firm texture. This is where you will find DRC and some of the other top names, and Louis Jadot.
Yeah, well, so the DRC, which is Domaine Romani Conti, which is a famed house. And of course, the question I always get almost invariably, whether it's Napa wines or even Burgundy, is is a $7,000 bottle of wine, 10 times better than a $700 bottle of wine? Is that 10 times better than a $70 bottle of wine? And we you and I probably tend to avoid the question. So.
It is unfortunate because this is where Burgundy is headed, and it's difficult. It's a difficult situation. But yes, indeed, the price in Burgundy are really skyrocketing for a few. But on the other hand, you find plenty of spectacular wines in Burgundy from maybe lesser known appellation, which hopefully will start getting some recognition now.
Well, you brought some today, and we're going to talk about them. But I always answer that question with the following: yes, it'd be very hard to, from an organoleptic profile, to look at a $7,000 bottle of wine and say, yeah, it's 10 times better than a $700 wine, which most people will never ever taste in their life, even a $700 bottle of wine, let alone a $70 bottle of wine. And it's not about that necessarily always. Sometimes it is about the pedigree. Sometimes it is about the story. Sometimes it is about breaking that pouring that bottle at a social event or a dinner where it means something to pour that bottle of wine, and that's just the value of the brand, and that's where it comes from. And I didn't tell you the story off camera, but there was a customer in, and he bought a couple bottles of DRC from me, and immediately after, the day after, he took them home, put them in the cellar, and somebody offered him $2,000 more per bottle than he paid me for. And I'm like, first of all, I'm a bad businessman. And second, that's how rare it is and how important to a collector something like this might be. So that's important. But the point of that is, it's in the Côte de Nuit. That's where most of the Grand Cru, which is the highest designation of Burgundy, is. And then we head south and we end up at the Côte de Beaune, which is sort of the largest district, isn't it?
Yeah, so Côte de Beaune is the land of the somewhat softer red wines with Pommard, Volnay, and we have a Pommard here today. And it is also the area of some of the finest whites. Corton Charlemagne, which we just discussed earlier, on that famous hill, which is almost at the joint between Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuit, both planted with red and white, all Grand Cru. And then, of course, a few further miles down, you have Meursault, Puligny, and Chassagne, which is that exceptional, almost triangle of top whites from the Côte de Beaune.
That's an interesting point before we get to the Chalonnais and the Mâconnais and the Beaujolais, because I want to stop on the hill where the Charlemagne is, where the Corton Charlemagne. What is it about Burgundy that, and this is, I have my own answer, but there's something crazy unique about the fact that those vineyards on the hillside create this extraordinarily complex wine that makes you like really think, right? When you taste it, you just go, wait a minute, what was that? Versus very, very good wines as well on the floor of the valley and across the valley. But what is it about Burgundy that happens? We have the same winemaker, we have the same grape, possibly the same rootstock, we don't know, that they're so different.
Well, look, first of all, Burgundy is all about a sense of place. And the goal of the winemaker is just to showcase that particular sense of place, that vineyard site and its expression of the climat, which has been classified, by the way, since 2015 as a World Heritage. So it's been there for thousands of years and it will never go away because it is also now protected. Now, to your point, Burgundy is a small strip of vineyards on a hill that tops 300 meters high at the most, and all of the finest wines are always located mid-slope. This is where you find all of the very best wines in Burgundy, for a variety of reasons, because it's about sun exposure, of course, and it's also about the soil and the geological soil. As you know, there's erosion, and as the soil keeps going down, the top gets thinner and the bottom gets a little bigger. But in mid-slope is where you have really the finest place to produce some of the greatest wines of Burgundy.
Isn't it fascinating?
It is. It's really magical. It's mystical. Burgundy has that. It's all about that particular sense of place, which is why in Burgundy you will never see on the front label the grape. Is it Chardonnay? It's Pinot. It doesn't really matter. What matters the most is where the vines grow and where is the wine coming from. Is it Gevrey, Chambertin? Is it Pernod Vergelès or Puligny?
I can't wait to go back and stand there again, because I've learned so much since the last time I was there that I want to go back and experience stand in the soil and touch it, because that's what it's about. Is that not what Frederic Barnier's job is? Is that what Cyril Chiroux's job is, to express what the ground is giving him?
Clearly, it's true. It's never about the winemaker or nor about the winery. It's all about that specific site, which is why sometimes you come across very unassuming personalities in Burgundy, which is not the case sometimes in other regions of the world, because the winemaker is always behind the site in itself. It's all about showing the greatest expression of what this particular climat should show.
Do you think, and maybe you're the exporter of the monde, right, of Louis Jadot's. You travel the world.
Yeah, I oversee a small team of four export managers.
You have only 4 people to cover the whole world?
Yes, but they're very
Must be a lot of
efficient.
work. Yes,
But
there
they're
must
very
be.
efficient, and we have good wine, so it's
Because-
an easy job.
Well, it's not. It might be easy in that representation of Louis Jadot, which is, and we'll talk about the history here, but and I don't know about France and other parts of the world. I do know about American consumers and what happens here and what we have to teach. So in France, is there appreciation for Burgundy, for Bordeaux, for Côte de Rhône, for the Languedoc? Do you see a larger appreciation in the French consumer for these small districts, for this 2-hectare vineyard, for the heritage of Louis Jadot versus other places in the world? In other words, the consumer's more educated.
It's an interesting question. So first of all, because French people were born around wine, they're a little less fascinated by the wine world and French wines in general. So they tend to come much later in wine than people in other countries. I meet with people here in the US or in my travels around the world being far more knowledgeable about French wine sometimes than French people.
That's so
because you grow up with wine as part of your almost daily meal.
Right.
And also because you have a regional aspect to wine. Let's say I was born in Brittany. We don't make any wine in Brittany, but we drink a lot of Bordeaux in Brittany. So for someone who will never go out of Brittany, if the family drinks Bordeaux, he will rarely be exposed to other wines outside of Bordeaux. And if you're born in Burgundy, you'll rarely come across a bottle of Bordeaux wine unless you really try hard.
That's true.
So we are in a very unique place. But that said, it's wine in general is getting the appeal of new generations also because the quality of wine, and especially the quality of Burgundy today, is really exceptional. You rarely come across a bad bottle of wine. And also where we can't hide the fact that there's deregulation of climate everywhere, but Burgundy's really been hit hard especially. But one of the positive effects, if any, is the fact that Pinot Noir tends to be a lot riper now. So the wines are more charming, more generous, which was not the case 15 years ago. If you were to come around September, harvest time, you could see some packs of sugar sometimes by the winery.
Really?
Because you could rarely get to 13% alcohol. That's not the case anymore.
Wow. Where's Brittany for the listeners in the scope of French geography?
So that's in the northwest part of France. It's that tip that comes out of France headed towards the US. So,
Not too far from Normandy.
Exactly. Yeah. If you go further south along the coast, it's on the right across England.
Because you're the third wine person from France that's been in here on the studio that's from Brittany. So I was trying to figure this out.
It's the only one region that doesn't make wine, so we're very maybe attracted to wine and very objective too.
Well, I mentioned that Monsieur Bignot from Chateau d'Albot is planting grapes there, and I haven't spoken with him since then. I had to find out what happened to those gorgeous vineyards. I got a trivia question since you brought it up. I just read this morning that the U.S. Again has surpassed all the European countries in total consumption of wine. In other words, not per capita. So the total consumption of wine, I forgot how many thousands of cases or millions of cases of wine a year, but it still leads. We passed the French about, 4 or 5 years ago.
Correct.
So, but the trivia question is, what country do you think, on a per capita basis, is the largest consumer of wine? And by the way, it's like 9 times more than the number 2 country.
France.
No.
Italy.
No. See, all those guys would be bunched into that middle group. It's the Vatican.
Well, there you go.
So
church wine.
Perhaps one of my favorite trivia questions that I always ask. And I'm going to ask you questions later from this book from Dr. Maury, which is an MD from France. He talks about the ailments of the human body and what wines cure it, and they obviously are all French since he wrote the book. So we're at the Côte de Beaune, and we have these amazing wines, and we're going to head south a little bit to the Chalonnais. And who if I'm a consumer and I'm looking through my Burgundy books, what am I going to find in Chalonnais? What well-known districts are there?
You have of course, a Puy-Frisé, you know, which produces very, very charming whites, very generous. You know, we have Domaine Ferret, which is one of the most iconic winery in that area. The wines are ripe. They are very charming early on. Great food wine, and also terrific value these days.
You brought the 18, I think.
The 18 Puy-Frisé, yes.
Yeah, really quite special. It started to take on the complexities of other parts of Burgundy.
Yes, exactly. The quality also has been really going up in the recent years because, you know, clearly some of the finest whites of you know, the Côte de Beaune are now also being challenged and by some of the you know, lesser known appellation from the south of Burgundy, and that's the case for Puy-Frisé.
You mentioned it earlier, talking about the French consuming at home. They probably don't pay attention too much to the different districts. They just know what they like. They probably go to the store, they buy the same thing, and the consumerism all over the world is the same. And I beg to differ a little bit in that they just brought me a case of samples yesterday or Tuesday that were from these Australian criminal things, and that's the stuff we see on the shelf, and they're just really not very good. And not until recently, and maybe it's because of the climat in Burgundy, that the entry-level Burgundies that we see in America have stepped up in quality. I've noticed it dramatically in the last couple of years. The ones that you do label Bourgogne Blanc, and then you put Chardonnay underneath, you know, Bourgogne Rouge, you put Pinot Noir underneath, and it's for the American consumer to understand what they're drinking. But up until recently, they were thin and insipid and flavorless, but lately they've been pretty good values when you're talking about relative Chardonnay in California.
Yeah, you know, you know, if you look at, you know, France in general, and especially Burgundy, it's a land of small farms with people that, you know, for former generations that never really traveled outside of Burgundy, and now you have you know, a new generations of winery owners, winemakers that have traveled all over the world. Everything is also becoming a lot more global. Technology has also kicked in. So the quality of the wines clearly is really good across the board, especially at the entry level. Plus, you know, when you're trying to present an appellation or a name that is not so known, you do feel the need to over-deliver. Mm-hmm. And that's the case. Today, for $20 on a shelf, you can really find an exceptional bottles of wine if you are willing to venture out of the usual suspects.
It's a problem. If you go to our local markets, and maybe not the same in France, but if you go to our local markets, if you go to the section of the market where they sell the mops and the dustpans, it's the same brands. In other words, there's a company out there that says, you know, I'll just bring in all the mops and stuff. Don't worry about it. Vaughn's, Ralph's, whatever. Don't worry about it. And the wine shelf's starting to look like that. You go to the shelf, and I guarantee you that the Louis Jadot label is recognizable on the shelf, but there's nothing in there of any consequence when it comes to the smaller vineyards or the smaller appellations. Nothing. It's always just the Bourgogne Blanc and the Bourgogne Rouge. And if you see one label, which is a very prominent, recognizable label, the Louis Jadot label, amongst all these other things, it's next to the Spanish, it's next to the Italian, because that part of the market shelf is, well, the rest of it's Napa. It's never going to get the word out. It takes somebody in a store to go, here, taste this. Is that the worldwide issue too as well?
It depends. But look, you can also, even within the world of a famous name such as Jadot, you can still find some gems, and even, you know, venture out your usual Bourgogne Blanc if you want to give a try to Bouzeron, for example. But it is true, usually you do need help and education in order to find the best bottles of wine, but all of those resources are available these days, which was not the case before.
The Bouzeron, I'm glad you brought that up, was pretty fabulous wine.
Yeah.
And it's not even village necessarily, right?
It is a village, and it's made with aligoté grape. And clearly, you know, this is an appellation that never really been at the forefront and has literally been taking off in the recent years because, of course, price consideration.
So Aligote as a white grape is grown in Burgundy. It's the only other white grape allowed, right, in the
Yes.
district of Burgundy.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of it.
No, look, you would usually see aligoté blended with crème de cassis from Dijon, for example, to do a Kier cocktail. But because it was also not a very good grape, which would tended to be fairly acidic also because still of that, very cool climate area we have in Burgundy. But now that it is literally becoming a little warmer, that's another grape also that's been benefiting from global warming. So the wines are good.
I thought it was fabulous. I thought it was well structured. I didn't sense, acid necessarily. I could have sworn it had Chardonnay in it just by its structure.
Right.
And here's a wine that clearly would have to be hand sold at a restaurant or at a store.
Probably, but it is made for us just like we would be making a Meursault or a Pruning.
Right.
It's aged in oak barrels for 12 months. The grapes obviously are picked by hand, severe work in the vineyard, organic farming. So
all the pedigree need.
Yeah, it is made as a serious wine, and although it's not a serious price.
And the price was very fair. I thought the price was really fair for what it was. So are there other, they're experimenting with, Touriga Nacional in Bordeaux because of the climate change, and it hasn't really altered picking patterns in California yet. There's some trellising going on and some canopy work, but I don't think like Burgundy. I mean, tell me what's going on with the climate change in Burgundy and things like this, which is interesting that, yes, some things are going to be changing, but there's places like Bouzeron that are coming on.
First of all, we're clearly being challenged by climate deregulation in Burgundy. If you look at the vintage 2021, we had a huge event of frost early April. And that's not unusual to get frost early April. The problem is the winters are a lot more mild than they used to be. So vegetation wakes up a lot earlier than before. So in 2021, for example, in Burgundy, we lost 60% of the production.
Wow.
So that was a real catastrophe. On top of it, if you look at the recent vintages, yes, they're very good because they've been benefiting from that climate deregulation in a positive way because the grapes are riper. But it is, in terms of yields, as if we were to lose one vintage every 3 years because production is a lot smaller than it once was. So we're trying to find ways to fight especially frost, which has become a real issue, but it is very complicated. If you look at Chablis, for example, they can use aspersion, where you spray water on the vines, and it gives a little bit of a bubble on the bottom and protects it. Yeah, we don't have water in Beaune. There's no river per se nearby, so we can't use water. One of the things that we're trying to do, for example, is to delay the pruning because it's just like a human. If you start touching the vine too early, then it wakes up.
Yeah.
And we want the vines to stay asleep for as much as we can so that it wakes up later, possibly past the frost. So frost is a big issue.
How do you do that?
Well, like I said, delaying the pruning. You can also experiment with fans.
So leave the canopy.
Yeah, exactly. Just on its own for as long as possible. And then, you start the work later.
It seems like when you only get one chance a year to try and figure this out and come up with ideas.
It's very it's the number one topic right now in Burgundy. Again, 2021, a number of wineries are really in economic stress because when you lose 60% of your production, it's hard.
That's phenomenal. I mean, I would have a very hard time here if I lost 60% of what I was selling that I paid for, because you've already paid for this basically.
Yes.
Or expecting the revenue to come down from that next vintage. There was and this is not political, and so I always say this because it's not a political show, but there was this cold snap, era during the 1700s that affected Burgundy and Champagne quite disastrously. Do we think this is a cycle, or that the cycle even though it's cyclical, that's going to happen, but it's still trending upwards.
No, it's not a cycle. For the past 15 years, we've been recording temperatures, and every single vintage is warm these days, with one exception, 2013 and possibly 2021. Outside of that, it's all warm vintages. Wow. When we were picking grapes, in average, late September 20 years ago, now it's a lot closer to late August, sometimes even mid-August.
Wow.
So, and that's a constant these days.
And you have to, you must be very vigilant to know where you're going to be every year.
It is complicated. Now, the most fascinating thing is also the plant in itself. The vines have this capacity to literally protect themselves from aggression, and that's the fact with climate change. And if you look at a vintage such as 2020, especially for the whites, the Chardonnay vines literally shut themselves in the middle of August in order to protect themselves and not to be completely dead because of hydric stress. Mm-hmm. And then they reopened when temperatures went slightly down. So it is a fascinating plant with the capacity to adapt, but to which extent?
You know, I wonder if maybe that's part of the answer to the question I've been trying to get. And there's no answer to the question I have, because when you taste a wine like the Corton Charlemagne that we had at dinner at my friend's house, and you go, wow, this is so special, and the grape is so interesting, and maybe this is part of it. Maybe the cycle of the plant is part of this value that comes to the glass that's so different for a grape than any other fruit. Well, we don't do this with orange juice, and we don't get excited about, Vitis Lambrusco wines. They don't do anything. But for somehow, the grape at this level of classification makes you think, and makes you reflect, and makes you realize you're not just having alcohol.
Yeah, and look, a bottle of wine also makes you travel back in time. It's the idea of a vintage. Every year is different. Yeah. It's a bottle of wine from a specific year. Maybe
That's true.
Birthday of your kid.
That's true.
A trip you took on, with your significant wife, or and in a such country. So it has that unique capacity to make you travel back in time, and also do some research, because it's about history, people, climate. It gathers so many great things, and food.
Here's who we were and when we were when you put that bottle of wine on the table.
Yeah.
So the other day I was on the beach in Hermosa Beach, and you can't take glass onto the beach. You're not even supposed to take alcohol on the beach, let alone a bottle of wine. So I put it in a plastic cup. But the sun's coming down, the water's beautiful. I mean, it's like to me, Southern California. that is Southern California when you walk on the beach. And I did a comment on a Facebook post saying, wine is about the experience. Now, maybe I don't have the right vessel, but man, having that glass of, I think it was Burgundy actually, walking on the sand, watching the sun come down, that was the experience. It just makes you feel something. So how is it a guy who spent his college career in America, who studied Spanish and Iberian studies, end up in Burgundy? How does this happen?
Oh well, it's a long story.
With two kids.
Well, I was always fascinated by a career which would make me travel. That's probably very common in Brittany. We're one of the areas in France where we have a lot of waters everywhere, and Breton people were known for traveling. I mean, one of your famous authors, Jacques Kerouac, who wrote a spectacular book on the road, is from Brittany.
Yeah, really.
So we do travel. It's in our DNA. So I wanted to travel. So I took on foreign languages and Spanish, which I was fascinated with. And when I was in college in the Loire Valley in Angers, I was supposed to finish my studies in business in Spain. And they said, the agreement with the Spanish university were just canceled. Do you mind going to the US? And I said, sure. So I finished my college degree in international business in Truman State University in Missouri, and ended up in New York to do an internship, and was offered a job in wine business, and I stayed on.
Wow! So wait a minute, you were in Missouri?
In Missouri?
I mean, that Missouri. In Missouri. I mean, that could be further from anything remote to Brittany or France. This is the South, the deep South of America. and you're in college there studying the Iberian Peninsula. Was it the culture of the Iberian?
So it was
culture, or was it the language?
it was Spanish literature, history, but I was also taking on some serious classes in also English. So I had to have number one language, which was Spanish for me, but
Right.
English was not far behind.
Wow,
So-
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And
but look,
so-
when you're 21 and you're offered to go study abroad, it's magnificent.
No, for sure.
So,
I think personally, when it comes to winemaking as well, the terroir of a wine would be where Frederick Barnier's worked prior and what he's experienced prior, and maybe it was living in Missouri. I don't know, but in Jacques Lardier, the same thing. It would have to be that what comes to the bottle has to do with that entire experience of your life and where you've been and what you've thought and what you've tasted. That reflects in what you've learned, and maybe you can't taste the exact change, but it's part of what we've done. So there's something about the Iberian pigs, though. Did you guys study the Iberian pigs?
oh well, of course the Spanish ham spectacular in the area of Cáceres, especially not too far from Portugal. But yes, the Spanish gastronomy is clearly a small part of the studies, but one of the most interesting ones.
That's very interesting. If you read, and it was leading into the organic biodynamic conversation that I wanted to have, when you talk about organic farming, biodynamic farming, Rudolf Steiner's book right here, they talk about the Iberian pigs, and they talk about what they ate. And the idea being, you are what you eats. And that's clearly what happens in Burgundy.
True. It's all about sense of place, farmer mentality. So we do pay close attention to the respect of the land.
So is organic farming, biodynamic farming, is that, I know that we had Anne Parent here from Pomar, and she's a biodynamic farmer, has been for years. Is that on the radar of Louis Jadot, or is it part of it now?
First of all,
farming?
organic farming is very complicated in Burgundy because it's very cold, it's very wet. Humidity brings disease, so it is a complicated task to take on. And we own 200 hectares of vineyard, so it's even more challenging in its size. And only 8% of Burgundy is certified organic. That said, because of that mentality of taking care of the land, it has been in the process of many wineries in Burgundy to farm according to organic principles. They just don't necessarily will say it, because many winemakers will tell you, look, I don't want to have to justify myself for doing the right thing. Why should I need
You're right.
a sticker?
I agree with that completely.
So at Jadot, we have been farming according to organic principles for many years already, whether it is Château des Jacques, Ferret, or Jadot. That said, we decided to start to go after the organic certification with the 2021 vintage, which was probably the most complicated vintage to start on because it rained all the time in the summer. So our teams had to spray homeopathic type of product, and because it's very homeopathic, after the rain, the product would be washed out, so they had to redo it all over again on the following day. But yet we decided to do so, and we will have certification with the 2024 vintage. But we did decide to do so because it's the right thing to do. And in all modesty, we are hoping, because we are a prominent name in Burgundy, that it will give confidence for other people to also follow the same path, hopefully. But we felt that in a way we had to do our part because it's the right thing to do.
I think organic farming is an important thing. I think sustainability, of all the industries in the world, I think the winemaking in the sustainable world makes the most sense because it's just part of recycling the earth and doing what's right to reclaim and keep the earth healthy. And even says in the Bible, every 7 years, give the crops a rest so they can regroup. And so I think that's an important thing. I agree with you completely. I don't think the certification is necessarily critical. That seems to be a marketing tool. You put the thing on the back, and the certification. I don't think that's important. I think what's important is that the consumer understands that I think every winemaker wants to produce wines that are as representative of the soil and the climate as possible, and that does lend itself to organic practices. But at the same time, you're not going to throw away a whole crop just because it got mildew.
Yeah, look, it's like everything in life and in wine in general. It's a balance. So no one wants to lose an entire crop and an entire business just for the sake of going organic. But on the other hand, we know that we need to do the right thing. But yet, sometimes you do more dangerous things in your life than drinking non-organic wines. But the most important thing is when it comes to wine, to know the philosophy of the winery, its take on the environment, and hopefully, the wines are good, because that's what matters the most. Also, is it a good bottle of wine?
That's what it comes down to, right? If you want to keep drinking. But I had a customer not too long ago call and complain because the wine was organic. The winemaker certified to me it was organic. There's no emblem on the back, and she insisted that it wasn't organic. And but I assured her that the winery had filled out my form and agreed to that, but I had to send her a wine that had the sticker on the back,
right.
Something else, which is ridiculous in my opinion. But
look, it's a complicated topic. On the other hand, if let's say I run a row of vineyard, which is certified organic, and right above me, and I'm on a slope, someone is working according to non-organic principles. If it rains, his product are going to go down in my vineyard.
Uh-huh.
It's a very complicated subject.
That would be very.
When it comes to us at Jadot, even though we will be working according to organic principles, we will not be able to label our wines organic for one simple reason, which is the fact that we are also making non-organic wine at the wineries. So unless we were to build a separate winery,
yeah,
we can't label our wines organic.
It's like the kosher thing, You
Exactly.
You can't do that.
So look,
well, I get it.
Yeah, I recommend trying to understand the philosophy of the winery. That's very important. And then, do you like the wine?
Right. It's interesting because last night when I was talking to this wine guy, that like geeky guy about wine, but he's a really nice guy. That we were talking about orange wines, and I said, yeah, there's some good orange wines. There's some great organic biodynamic, but there's also the other style where they taste like kombucha, and you have to muscle it down in order to drink it. And I don't want to do that with wine. I want to enjoy the wine. I want to be part of it. So it's just an ongoing thing, and we see them all the time. And we have reps that come in and say, "This is organic." I'm like, I don't know if it matters. Let me taste the wine and see what it's about. Right? That's what it's about. Now, I want to touch on one thing you said earlier, the Domaine Ferré. How old is that winery?
1840. It's one of the most iconic winery. Always had a female personality at the forefront. Jeanne Ferré.
What was her name?
Jeanne
Ferré.
Yes.
So this is a woman in wine in 1840.
So no, she started. It was her ancestor who had started, but she was the last woman in charge of Ferré, and really the one who brought Ferré and the appellation of Pouilly-Fuissé to a different level, because she believed that in Pouilly-Fuissé some parts of the vineyards produced better wine than others. Because she was not allowed to use Premier Cru or Grand Cru classification, she decided to name her wines Tête de Cru, Cuvée hors classe, which meant Premier Cru and Grand Cru.
Class.
And she did receive some sort of recognition, because with the vintage 2020, Pouilly-Fuissé now has its own Premier Cru classification as well.
And when did she start?
She started, she was in charge of Ferré, it was in the mid-70s, and she passed away in the early 80s.
So this is an interesting subject, and I wonder if it's popular in Burgundy or if it's a political sword, and that is the idea of women in wine. And in America, it's very important, and to me, it's great, and we have wonderful women in wine, and they always should have been. They have better palates than we do anyway, right? So, but is it a political football in France about what might be considered a male-dominated industry?
No, I mean more and more they're very a lot of women at important position in the wine business. It's of course it's always been, especially sometimes in more farmer mentality, more of a man thing. But in Burgundy, you tend to see more and more, and all over France, but women at the forefront of top wineries, and both from a technical standpoint or management areas as well. So
I think I had Nicole Rollet in, and one of the brightest wine people I've ever met. I mean, just amazingly philosophical about the subject, and I don't make a point of one way or the other. Of if they're in, and we're going to talk, but it's brought up all the time, and it's not that it bothers me. It's just like I don't see why that we have to make the attention to it when it just is. It's just a really good thing, and it just was happening. I did have a woman in here though. She was on a podcast. It was a Zoomcast. She's a young black girl, and she makes wine from flowers in Northern California. She has a winery. She has a federally registered winery. And so she told me, when I go to try to sell my wines, I experience racism, I experience sexism, I experience grape supremacy. And I go, I've never heard that term before. What is grape supremacy? She says, well, if you walk into a liquor store or a wine shop and you say, I have wine from flowers, they kick you out. So, okay, that's a problem. What is the ongoing philosophy at Louis Jadot? Not ongoing. The future? What are we looking to do? Are we going to expand more vineyards of interesting areas that are changing from climate? What are we looking to do? What's the future? What's the conversations with Frederic Barnier and the group when you sit down?
Well, first of all, what we always try to do is make sure that we're always looking ahead. In that sense, considering that people see us as a very traditional winery, our name dates back from the 19th century, yet we do feel the need for always looking ahead. So we're doing some experiments, for example, with barrels. Frédéric would tell you that he's purchased some large foudre just to do some experiments on winemaking. Yeah. So that's from technical standpoint. We also have a winery in Oregon called Resonance. So we've ventured outside of France. Again, looking ahead. The organic viticulture is really important for us, the consideration for the environment. So these are very important topics, generally speaking, at Jadot.
Monsieur Guam.
Sorry?
Guam.
Yes.
Guillaume, I always get it wrong.
Guillaume Large, our friend. Yes, terrific wines in Oregon. Great place for Pinot and Chardonnay.
I was reading, I run around out of time here, but I want to ask you two questions. One is, I read about this bike to care. This looked like it was like a 97-kilometer ride. I mean, like serious ride through. Did you ride in this?
Well, thanks for. Yes, indeed, I did last week.
Last week.
2 days, 100 kilometers both days with chefs and sommeliers from all over the world, raising money for a good cause. And we had two teams coming from the U.S. Team of
Paul
chefs.
was there.
Yeah, team of sommelier led by Daniel Jonas of La Polée.
Wow.
And team for Canada, the UK, Denmark, and we raised 250,000 euros for different associations.
That's formidable.
So
that's amazing. And so you rode and drank and ate. Is that what it was?
Pretty much. But did ride a lot for good causes indeed.
No, those are the 100K a day.
Yeah.
But
in the Burgundy vineyard, it feels like a home run.
That's phenomenal. I'm a writer, just so next year, you need somebody to fill in. So.
Okay, for the next edition of Bike to Care. Okay.
That's great. All right, I'm going to ask you this one question. This is, I think I told you about it earlier. This is Wine is the Best Medicine by Dr. Murray. The book originally was published in 1975. He's an MD, a French MD, as well as a homeopathic doctor. And he wrote about human ailments and which wines are good for those ailments. So I'm going to give you an ailment and 3 different choices, and you can tell me which one of those choices might solve the problem. I will say that in the book, in some places, he says, "Well, we don't know if it does anything, but you'll feel better anyway." So, all right. So
one glass a day.
Yeah, exactly. If you want, if you want to lose weight, you have to drink wine, according to this book, and you can either drink a Saint-Emilion, a Champagne, or a Côte de Beaune Rouge. Which one of those three would help you lose weight?
Champagne perhaps has less calories, tends to ripen a little less alcohol.
Yeah, that's an interesting response. You know, as like when you study for the MW or the MS, you know, they're more interested in the response than they are necessarily the correctness of the answer, but that was wrong.
Okay. All right.
So, but can I set you up?
Please.
It's a Côte de Beaune.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure we have to look up why.
That's from the time where we couldn't get to 12% alcohol, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that's right. You're probably right. So it says. So the question is, what's the dosage then? How much bone should I drink in order to lose weight?
I'll say 1 glass a day to keep the dark away. But in this day and age, it's becoming a little bit of a rarity, Burgundy. We're hoping for a large 2022 harvest. So, but 1 good glass a day. Côte de Beaune produces fantastic.
So maybe you're that's an interesting point, because this is 1974, so it probably was a lot easier to come by. But because he wants you to drink 4 glasses a day. And I suppose maybe that's one of those things that makes you just feel better, whether you're losing weight or not. It's okay.
If I would be telling today on the French radio show to drink 4 glasses a day, I would probably end up in jail because you can't.
Well, we'll keep this.
It's not very good for you. Ultimately, it's still alcohol.
Yeah. That's the part too that the Americans, by the way, just came down. I got to finish reading the article, but they just came down on the wineries that are labeling, or trying to suggest there's health benefits to drinking their wines. Now they're talking about the low carb, low alcohol, no sugar, whatever these guys talk about, which I think is horse hockey as well. But the feds came down and said, look, you're not doing that anymore. I'm not sure where they're going to draw the line, but I've gone through labels specifically and gone, no carbs, low carb, It makes you think you're doing yourself a favor, right?
Well, there might be a lot of other things hidden on the product list.
That's true.
So,
what do you think of that before we get off? What do you think of ingredients on a wine label?
It's a touchy subject. When you go to a top restaurant, you go see the chef and ask for every single ingredient he used to make his sauce? Probably not. You just trust the chef. If he makes good food, then let yourself dream and not wonder about every single thing you have on the plate. And that's the same thing for wine. You trust the wine from Louis Jadot and Frédéric Barnier, then maybe you don't need to know every single thing, because at the end of the day, winemaking is just very close to gastronomy. It's of course you're using grapes, but you're not doing anything crazy with the grapes by adding chemical things either.
That's the best argument I've heard. No one's ever said, do you ever walk back? I did walk back in the kitchen the other day at a restaurant to tell the chef how good the food was, but no one's going to ask, can I see the ingredient jars?
You gotta let yourself be
argument.
Surprised every once in a while.
That's a great argument.
Every once in a while in life. I mean, if you need to know every single thing all the time, where's the surprise?
Yeah, it's no fun. It's been a huge pleasure. We're actually almost at an hour here. So, David, thanks for coming in. I know you have a full day today. And I appreciate the opportunity to have a chance to speak with you. And
anytime, Paul.
And, I hope to see you when we are out there next.
Please, on a bike. On a bike.
On a bike. Cheers. Take care.
Thank you.